What if I was to tell you that everything that you think you know about persuasion is wrong? Well, it's probably not. Probably most of what you know about persuasion is actually right, but there's an awful lot more that you can learn about it. And in this episode of the Change Your Minds podcast, I want to walk you through 10 of some of my favorite books in the area of influence and persuasion. I'm going to be sharing with you some of the most important ideas that have ever been discovered in the field of how you can help people to change their minds. This one is going to be packed to the brim with some amazing ideas from incredible authors. I'm excited about this one. Let's go for it. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Change Your Minds podcast. I'm Owen Fitzpatrick, and today we're going to be talking about 10 incredible books in the area of influence and persuasion. Now, in a past episode, I walked through some of the most important books ever written about storytelling. And today we're going to focus exclusively on what are the best kind of books that you can read and you can learn from that will help you to become more effective at influencing other people and persuading other people. Now, first of all, just to give you a very simple definition, influence is anything you do that can impact and move the way in which a person is acting or thinking, and persuasion is a more detailed version of influence where we're actually trying to change someone's attitude or behavior deliberately. So when we look at influence, persuasion is like a subset of influence. So a lot of these books will be particularly relevant for persuasion, but all of them will be particularly important when it comes to influence. So let's start with the classic. The most important book, they say, ever written about the area of influence and persuasion is, of course, the book Influence. It was once called The Science of Persuasion or the Principles of Persuasion, but Influence or Science and Practice. Influence is a book that was written, I think, in the 1980s by Robert Cialdini initially, and it was something that was updated only a few years ago initially it had 6 principles of influence, now it has 7. And so what I want to do is just give you a quick overview of these 7 principles of influence and help you understand what it's all about and how it can be useful. So first of all, the 7 principles of influence started off with the original 6, which were scarcity, social proof, commitment or consistency, reciprocity, liking, and authority. So let me walk you through each one of these. First of all, we have reciprocity. And reciprocity is when you give something to somebody, they feel obliged to give back to you. So in other words, if you want to be able to get someone to do something for them first, and they'll be more likely to feel obliged to give back to you. Give them a free sample. The first one of these is free. Get them into a position where they feel like a sense of reciprocity to give back to you. And that's a very, very powerful principle. The second principle is commitment and consistency. And this is really that people have a need to be consistent with their prior commitments. So in other words, if I want to get you to do something, what I need to do is get you to say yes to something small, and it's easier to get you to say yes to something bigger. So if you do a small favor for me, that actually will help me to get you to do a bigger favor for me later on, because you'll feel a need to be consistent with your prior behaviors. In other words, you'll think to yourself, well, I've helped Owen before, so therefore I can help him in the future as well. And this desire to be consistent with your prior actions means that if I want to get you to do something big, if I can get you to do something small for me first, that will be very advantageous as a result. The third principle is the principle of social proof. And this is, in a nutshell, suggesting that when lots of other people think something is great, you're more likely to think it's great too. So if lots of people are saying this is a great book, or this is a great podcast, or this is a great song, you're more likely to believe in it as well. Social proof is when we're very much influenced by what most people just like us also believe. Then we have the principle of liking, which is that whenever you like someone, you give them the benefit of the doubt. You want to believe them. So the more that you like a person, the more likely you are to believe that they're actually saying the truth to you, the more likely you are to be persuaded by them. There's the principle of authority, which is when a person is in a position of authority, they tend to demonstrate what we call the trappings of authority. They tend to know what they're talking about. We're more likely to believe them because they're in that position of authority. And then finally, scarcity. We believe in something more because it is limited. It's hard to get. The whole nature of playing hard to get, the more scarce something is, the more we give value to it. So they were the original 6 principles. And recently in Cialdini's updated version, which is behind me there on the shelf, he talked about a 7th principle, which is called the principle of unity. And the principle of unity is the notion that it's easier for us to persuade people when they perceive themselves to be part of the same group as us. And especially in the polarized time that we live in, the us versus them mentality that many people have, this particular principle is as important as it's ever been. And so, it's again, in a very simplified way, these 7 triggers of influence allow us to be significantly more powerful in the way in which we can persuade other people. So how do you apply them? Well, you can apply them in lots of different situations. You can apply them in business, in marketing, in sales. You can apply them in negotiation and leadership. You can apply them as a parent. You can apply them as a friend, everyday influence interactions. Fundamentally, these are the tools that will help you to be able to get people to say yes. But one of the things Cialdini also talks about and spends a lot of time being, I suppose, very insistent on is the importance of making sure that you're ethically influencing it. A large part of Bob's work is his focus on ethical influences in nature. So when you're leveraging or using these triggers, you're doing so in an ethical way. And he gives lots of different types of examples in the book. The book, especially the revised version, the latest version, it's definitely worth getting on. You can also check out a previous episode of the Changing Minds podcast where I actually interviewed Bob Cialdini on the podcast, which was an amazing interview. I was so privileged and delighted to have him on, but definitely recommend checking that out. But some strategies that, for instance, you could use is give first, obviously. So free samples, give people helpful advice, do unexpected favors that will increase compliance from that perspective. Ask for small commitments. So look for people to agree on a tiny step, as we said. Show what other people are doing. So there's an idea or concept that Bob calls future social proof, where you not only talk about what people are doing, but you show the trend of a particular behavior and you go, oh, look, the trend is going in this direction. It's almost what he says is leveraging future social proof. So it's still a very powerful way to be able to get people behind an idea, is to show that that idea is increasing in terms of popularity, for instance. Be likable. That's finding common ground. Give compliments. Show genuine interest. Find similarity with someone. Highlight exclusivity, which is also sort of the notion of scarcity or urgency. Sometimes there's a scarcity of time. Sometimes there's scarcity of amount. There's only so many left. Or if it's, for example, something online, then you can do limited time, which is another form of scarcity. And then using we language, which kind of promotes unity. How can you make it so that the person that you're talking to feels like they're on the same team as you? How can you build that sense of collaboration? And typically, when we have a familial connection with someone, in other words, we feel we're part of the same family, part of the same culture, part of the same grouping, that's one way to build unity. But another way to build unity is that we collaborate with them. We're working on the same thing. We're pursuing the same goals. We're part of the same team, at least when it comes to trying to overcome this particular challenge or monster or accomplishing this particular result or score. So definitely recommend Cialdini, Influence. It's a game changer. It's the most important book you can buy in the field of influence or persuasion. Have I said enough? Cialdini has also written a number of other books, but his other well-known book is the book he calls Persuasion. And this was a cool type of book. This was released, I think, around about 2016. And in it, the main key idea is what happens before a persuasive attempt actually plays a large part in determining how likely a person will be persuaded. It's kind of related to the notion of priming, which is when you want to influence someone, if you can create a state before you actually have the conversation, a state of mind and emotion, before you have the conversation, that will largely play a great part in determining how they respond or react. One of the things that Cialdini talks about in terms of persuasion is the importance of your attention and focus. And whenever you persuade them, you want to get their attention focused on the right kinds of things. I'll give you a number of examples in a moment. But one of the examples, I suppose, from the field of negotiation is the concept of anchoring. And anchoring is really when the first piece of information that you get, it's almost like you set an anchor down and people then respond to that anchor and they're very much influenced by that anchor. So there's a lot of research out there that looks at how whatever the first piece of information we get, how that actually will influence the very things that we think as a result of that. For instance, if, we're taught to focus on a certain high number, and then we're asked to predict how many countries there are in Africa, we're more likely to guess more countries in Africa than if in a different condition, we're focusing on a much smaller number. And we're asked the same kind of question. So imagine you did a study whereby you say to people, I want you to think about the number 92. And then another group, you say, I want you to think about the number 15. Well, in the two groups, what you would expect from this research is that the people that were focused on 92 and then asked the question, how many countries are there in Africa, are more likely to overestimate the amount of countries that are there, which makes no sense because the random number is nothing whatsoever to do with the amount of countries, but it just primes us, gets us into thinking in that terms. Now, persuasion is something that shows up in sales calls. This could be setting the right emotional state before you pitch. Interviews, where you shape the perceptions before you even enter the room, the way you might describe, for example, the actual experience of the interview. And even advertisers, when they create top-of-mind associations before customers buy. So a lot of branding is designed to be able to prime us in these ways. So Cialdini talks about the moment before persuasion happens is where the real magic occurs. Environmental cues can sometimes matter more than logic. So if you change the environment and you cultivate the right kind of environment, and a little bit later, we'll talk about another book, Nudge, which talks about the environment quite a lot and how powerful that can be. So getting people to think differently about the persuasion attempt you're about to have is particularly relevant and important. And that's what Cialdini talks about. So to give you some examples and some strategies, one is to prime the right kind of emotion. So for example, if you want people to think about you in a positive way, you want to create the right kinds of positive feelings. There was a fascinating study whereby experimenters would get some students in a lab. And what they would do is they would be giving them a page with a set of sort of neutral descriptions about a particular character. And the subject in the interview would have to say, well, what do they think about this character? Like to use some descriptions to describe what kind of person was this character. But what they didn't realize was in one of the conditions, the experimenter would say, by the way, can you just hold this? And we'll give them an iced coffee. So the participant would be holding an iced coffee while the experimenter gets the experiment ready. In the other condition, the experimenter would hand them a warm coffee. Just to say, could you hold my coffee for a second? So the person will be holding the warm coffee. And interestingly, when the person was asked to describe the character, this is just in the experiment, they were more likely to describe the character as warm, as good, as all these positive qualities when they were just after holding the warm coffee than they were when they were holding the iced coffee. Now, this seems ridiculous. It seems crazy. But once again, the physical experience we have can influence the way in which we feel, which in turn can influence the actual mode that we're in at that time. There's all sorts of other fascinating things, which is, I think in certain experiments, they had people doing exams. And in some cases, they were primed by telling them to focus on their gender. And in other cases, they were focusing on their culture or background or heritage. And when that culture was known as being particularly good at, let's say, at math, and they were told to, oh, by the way, write down your culture at the beginning of the test, and then they did the test, they actually were more likely to score better than when they were told to write down their gender if the gender was not associated with being particularly good at math. So really just small things that can actually make an impact. Fascinating stuff altogether. So Cialdini talks about asking a question at the beginning to align focus. Instead of asking, do you want to donate? First, you start off with, would you consider yourself a generous person? So once again, if I say to you, I'm generous, and then you ask me for a donation, much more likely I'm going to say, oh yeah, right? And that's, again, harping back to Cialdini's commitment to consistency. I want to be consistent with me telling you that I'm a generous person, but also puts you in that generous motion. He talks about using pre-framing before pitching, highlight the key problem they face. So get them into the perspective where they know they need to solve the problem. He talks about setting a high anchor. So our premium package is normally $10,000 before revealing the $2,000 option that makes price juxtaposition. It makes it sound like a great deal. Creating a contrast effect. Now, contrast is also something he talks about in Influence at length before he gets into all the principles, the importance that a lot of value, a lot of the way in which we evaluate what something is worth is in contrast to something else. And something that seems good will seem bad compared to something that's better. And something that seems bad will actually seem good compared to something that's worse. So the importance of contrast as a tool, again, before it. So you set an exaggerated bad option first to make the real one seem better. And then control the first impression. The first thing someone sees or hears or experiences will shape the entire conversation that you have with them. So sometimes, for example, luxury brands will play high-priced items near the store entrances to get you in that mode. And you're like, oh, I can never afford this. And then finally you go, oh my goodness, it's only $2 million. Oh, I can afford that. If you can afford that, good for you. Restaurants can sometimes use decoy pricing to make mid-tier options seem like the best deal. And then Netflix can sometimes, this is an interesting one, can sometimes autoplay trailers because they've noticed that the visuals tend to create a stronger emotional experience for people than the actual words will. So Persuasion is a pretty cool book, very fascinating. Kind of gives a summary of a lot of the literature out there in terms of priming, which is an excellent notion. There's also a book, I can't remember the name of the author, but it's called Drunk Tank Pink. And it's quite a cool, I think it's Adler, is it? Anyway, it's a cool book, just not by Cialdini or anything, but it's a cool book that kind of gets into more of that kind of research and stuff to do with priming as it's known. Number 3, we have a return to someone who's a bit familiar to all of us here on the Change Your Minds podcast. In fact, we did an episode of him quite recently, the wonderful Aristotle. Good old Aristotle. He wrote a book called Rhetoric, and Rhetoric is the art of rhetoric is a wonderful, wonderful book. It was one of the original gangster books. And this book is about fundamentally it starts at his main theory of persuasion. You've heard me say it a billion times before. Ethos, logos, and pathos. Ethos, of course, is how persuasive you are, the credibility of the speaker. Logos is the logical reason, how effective your logical argument is, being able to put across your message with evidence and all that sort of stuff. And then pathos is your emotional argument. And so how persuasive you are by emotional appeal. And those are the 3 important elements to being more persuasive. Now, he also talks about frameworks of the 5 canons of rhetoric, as he calls it. He talks about invention, which is get clear on what your core message is. Arrangement, which is how do you structure your argument for a maximum impact. Style, what words and techniques can make it more memorable, the importance of memorability. Memory, how can you internalize it and deliver it seamlessly and smoothly. And finally, delivery, how do you engage people emotionally? So the pathos element coming to light there. But really powerful stuff. Obviously, he also goes into tons of different rhetorical techniques, but it's a classic. It's a little harder to read because, he's an ancient Greek and there's an awful lot of sort of terms they would have used back then that are a little different. I didn't read it in the ancient Greek, by the way, just in case you say, oh, you read in the ancient Greek then? No, I didn't read in the ancient Greek. Can't even read modern Greek. So most of the time, I can't even read, books written by certain authors. Although I did read 3 books by Jordan Peterson and they had a lot of syllables. So if I could do that, I could certainly get through a little bit of Aristotle. Anyway, principles can be used in public speaking, of course, sales pitches, writing persuasive copy. Lots of examples of this in history, but fundamentally, Aristotle brought us concepts like people trust credibility over expertise. What we mean by this is you don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but the most believable. And you can be believable not just by, I'm the smartest, but actually by being more trustworthy, by being able to understand people better and knowing what they need to hear and knowing how they need to feel. Logic alone is not enough to persuade. The importance of emotion. Aristotle was one of the earliest people to be able to say this. The sophists before Aristotle kind of used this, but Aristotle was the person who kind of analyzed it and looked at it in this great book. And he also talked about the importance of repetition. So he said, you want to start and open with credibility, tell compelling stories, use vivid imagery, use contrast again to extremes, use rhetorical skills, and make sure that you're clear about what you want them to do. So lots of wonderful examples there. So definitely recommend The Art of Rhetoric by Aristotle. Number 4 is Nudge, and this is about improving decisions about health, wealth, and happiness by Richard Taylor and Cass Sunstein. And this was written in 2008, and it is in the area of what we call behavioral economics, which is an area popularized by the work of people like Danny Kahneman in his amazing book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which talks about the work that he did along with his collaborator for many years, Amos Tversky. And behavioral economics is really the psychology of decision making, helping us to understand why we make the errors in our thinking that we do, what we call cognitive biases that occur, which we've done a lot of episodes this season on cognitive biases and all that sort of crack today. So Nudge itself is a great book because it talks about how one of the best ways to influence people and to be able to get people to take action or to change behaviors is actually by subtle nudges in their environment without forcing them. And some examples of this would be, for instance, if you look at what Google did in their cafeteria. Just over 5 years ago, I went along to the Google campus and I was meeting with some of the leaders there with a colleague and friend of mine, Alessio. And we were talking to some of them there. And one of the leaders walked us around the various different cafeteria in the campus in San Francisco. And he talked about how they really wanted to be able to encourage healthy eating. And they had healthy snacks in the cafeteria and they had unhealthy snacks. And they tried to put nutritional information that didn't really influence eating. They tried to ban the unhealthy snacks. That didn't work well at all. People were very pissed off with that. So they finally found something that worked. And all it was that they made the healthy snacks easier to access than the unhealthy snacks. They would take the potato chips or the crisps, and they would take the biscuits or cookies, and they would make it so that you had to go into the cupboards to find them. Whereas if you wanted a piece of fruit, they were available in a bowl on the table, very easy to just grab and access effortlessly. And so what we know about this is that the reason why this is so powerful, the reason why this is so effective, is simply because it allows us to fundamentally use our laziness against us. And so what we need to recognize is nudging is about making it easy to do the actions that will help us to do what we need to do and harder to do the actions that won't. Another example is when we set things up so it's a default. So if you want to be able to save money, if you have a default set in your account, so at the 25th of every single month, a certain percentage or a certain amount is transferred over to your savings account effortlessly in a default way, well, you're more likely to save better if that happens, right? So it's creating an environment where things are more likely to happen for you in a way that serves you than if you have to put deliberate effort into it. So nudging is about creating an environment that moves you towards the kind of behaviors that it wants you to. One of the most famous examples is one that was done in Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, whereby, and this is a really great one, where they wanted to be able to reduce spillage in the men's urinals. So what was happening was, I know, you tune in to the Change Your Minds podcast for information like this. Anyway, in Schiphol Airport, apparently a lot of people were like, let's just say, spraying it all over the place. And I don't mean that they were doing it deliberately. I mean, that would be really weird, especially in an airport. But what they would do is they would go into the urinal and a lot of spillage was happening all over. People weren't paying attention. They were like distracted or something, as you might be in your, maybe they were worried they were late for their flight. Anyway, what they wanted to do was reduce spillage. And one of the things they did was they said, right, let's help people be more focused. So they painted flies on the urinal. Not a word of a lie. And as a result of that, it reduced spillage significantly. Now, the explanation is it because finally people had something to aim at? You might think to yourself, seriously, that is so messed up. Guys are so messed up. I can't believe you actually need something to aim at so that you don't like destroy the bathroom. I'm just telling you what the psychological research suggests. Anyway, the point is there's a couple of frameworks, ideas that came from nudge. One is called choice architecture. This is really how choices are presented can actually influence decision making. They talked about what's known as libertarian paternalism, which is a big word, but all it means is people should still have freedom, but the system should nudge them towards better options. So as opposed to persuading them or forcing them, it's like, we just want to make it more likely that you'll do this. And we recognize that people have biases and heuristics, mental shortcuts we use, which make them more predictable in the mistakes that they will make. As a result of that, we want to be able to improve things. Nudge can be used and has been used in terms of the government with policy changes that improve public decision making. It allows us in business to structure options that guide customer behavior. And in our personal life, it can also help us to improve our habits. A lot of the work that James Clear in Atomic Habits talks about is make it automatic, make it easy. Those kind of suggestions are really oriented around this notion that we can create sort of an environment for ourselves where we nudge ourselves towards the new actions we want. Defaults do matter, so people stick with preset options. So try to create the right kind of opt-ins for yourself. Small tweaks can lead to big changes. The notion of atomic habits itself, or even Tiny Habits from BJ Fogg, the other book that is very good about habits, both talks about small little shifts we can make in an environment that makes it easier. Like, you're more likely to work out if it's easy for you to get to your gym, or if you're in your gym clothes already, it's more likely that you work out. And humans, it's based on the understanding, nudges, that humans need help making good choices because our instincts will often betray us and sometimes we'll be lazy. So nudges can help correct our course. So some suggestions from the authors: set the right defaults, make the desired choice the easiest one, use smart framing, present information in a way that highlights the benefits, simplify complex choices, make it easy and reduce options so we overcome decision paralysis, leverage social norms, show that most people are already doing the behavior you want, again combining that with the social proof piece from Cialdini, trigger loss aversion, so people hate on average losing money more than they love winning. So make it so that you frame things in terms of what they will lose if they don't do it, as opposed to what they will gain if they do. And make good behaviors convenient, reduce friction, make it easier for them to get the result that they're looking for. So fantastic stuff there. Book number 5 is Drive The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us by Daniel Pink. Daniel Pink is someone who's written a number of great books about all sorts of different areas. He looks at motivation. And when he looks at motivation, he's really talking about the key idea is that we need to think differently about the way in which we conceptualize motivation. He talks about motivation 1.0, which is really motivations about survival and the basic needs drive us, and the whole notion of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He talks about motivation 2.0 about rewards and punishment and the whole Skinner and behavioral psychology, and we need to reward. We give people external incentives that will shape behavior, but only for the short term. Instead, he says we need a motivation 3.0. And this is what is known as intrinsic motivation, right? So intrinsic motivation is that we thrive on not just what rewards we get externally, but how it makes us feel internally. And he says that there's three elements to this: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And he says these are the three most important of all of the drives, all of the motivations. And this is obviously relevant for leaders in terms of leadership. It's useful in terms of education, helping students be motivated. And it's particularly helpful as well in terms of personal development and even parenting as well. Some takes from Daniel Pink, some unique takes from him is money is actually a weak motivator for complex tasks. So in a nutshell, he talks about like money is an extrinsic reward. In other words, it's something that motivates us from the outside. And the research seems to suggest that whenever you are given money, sometimes that can actually demotivate you. And that's particularly for complex tasks. And the reasoning is that if you're told to do something easy and I do this, and you get rewarded with money, well, you're more likely to be motivated because you know that you're doing it to get money. But for more complex tasks, what tends to work better is intrinsic motivation. In other words, motivated because of the meaning you will get from it, motivated because of the impact it will have, motivated because of the fact that it's a challenge, right? And you want to master it. So he suggests that if we want to motivate people more effectively in the world, we need to recognize that money is not very useful when it comes to anything that isn't very, very straightforward and easy. He also suggested that people perform better when they feel in control. So you want to motivate someone, give them a sense of autonomy, which once again makes a lot of sense. And he talks about the importance of mastery as well as being something that people love. And they love the feeling of challenging themselves. And if you look at any sort of the open source in the computer world where people do so many things for free, and you ask yourself, why are people spending so much time putting stuff out in the open source when they don't even get paid for it? Well, one of the main reasons is because mastery. They love to be able to not only show what they can do, but challenge themselves in that way. So autonomy, mastery, and purpose are the three forms of intrinsic motivation that Dan Pink talks about as being particularly important. He suggests a number of strategies from this book, some examples like give people control, a sense of autonomy when you want to motivate them, encourage mastery, so challenge them in a way to be able to get the best out of them. Make sure you connect whatever they're doing to a greater purpose and impact. Use intrinsic rewards, in other words, praise effort and progress, not just results, which ties up with the growth mindset as we know. Allow creativity in the way in which people work and give them a sense of ownership so they do things in their way. Google had an example of this. I know we used Google to describe nudging, but Google also did something quite smart where they gave people sort of the extra time that they could use themselves on some sort of project, which led to some amazing innovations like Gmail, for example, or Google Maps. Zappos allowed their employees to make customer service decisions. That increased the job satisfaction, gave them a sense of control as well. But certainly, if we want to be better leaders, if we want to be able to motivate people more effectively, we can learn a lot of amazing lessons from the book Drive. Number 6 is How Minds Change by Dave McRaney, written in 2022. It's one of my favorite books on persuasion influence. And really, in a nutshell, he talks about the fact that people don't change their minds on facts alone, but when their beliefs are challenged safely and incrementally. And he really talks about, I think he was someone who has been saying for years that people don't really, you don't change minds. People change their own minds, but all you do is try to create the conditions whereby they do that. And so in it, he talks about a number of different approaches. He talks about motivational interviewing, deep canvassing, street epistemology, really introduces these ideas in a big way. What's great about the book is he travels around and really dives into understanding the way, for example, a cult or a particular religious group thinks, tries to get into their psychology, interviews folks that have changed their minds, so had radically different beliefs as a result of some sort of experiences. And he also studies the literature quite well and learns from quite experts. So it really is a comprehensive, wonderful exploration about how people change their minds. I couldn't recommend it highly enough. This is very, very useful, obviously, not just in terms of debates or in leadership or sales and marketing, but even in politics and in changing public policy. The lessons that we can learn from a lot of the ideas inside of how minds change can make a huge impact to the world, I believe. Some specific strategies would include listen first, speak later. So people tend to open up their way of thinking and be more likely to be open to a different way of thinking if you really listen. And important element here is listening with respect. So often in the world that we live in, the polarized world, it can be very easy that immediately, as soon as I disagree with you, I'm thinking to myself, it's me versus you, it's us versus them, I got to defend my point of view. What's really important and what How Minds Change sort of shows through the various different methods from deep canvassing to street epistemology is the importance of recognizing how people need to feel respected. They need to feel like you respect their point of view. And when you listen and you really let them explain their perspective or point of view, more often than not, that allows you to be able to help them to see things differently. And to a degree, whereas Socrates didn't really do it because he was using Socratic irony, he would ask questions to other people to really try to understand why they believe what they believe. And in a nutshell, one of the most useful techniques is to ask the person the question, what made you believe that? Because the more people start to describe why they believe what they believe, the more they realize that, let's say, the foundations upon which that belief was based might not be as strong as they might have first thought. And that opens their mind to being able to change. And that's so important, again, especially in the modern age. It's important for us to highlight contradictions gently. So once again, it's easy to be a smartass and go, well, you said this, but what about that? But the more you try to catch someone out, the more you're likely to trigger things like reactance, where people have this inbuilt need to be able to say no. And so it's important to let them discover the inconsistencies of their own ways of thinking, again, by listening and asking questions that guide them towards that. It's important to build trust first, so demonstrate that respect from the get-go and use stories and examples. Use your own stories, your own examples. They tend to be a lot more persuasive because they're less likely to face logical defenses. And the more you can make change their idea, the more you can help them to change their minds as opposed to changing their minds yourself, the more likely you are to be successful. And that's really one of the main big ideas from the books. Deep canvassing itself is a field that was developed by incredible work done by canvassers who tried to change policy initially around LGBTQ plus rights for same-sex marriage. And the activists were able to shift the needle a number of percentage points. And they did it really by having incredible conversations with various different folks, door to door, over the space of about 20 minutes or so, where they would really listen to the other person with respect, ask them questions, and then share their perspectives and stories, right? Didn't go in, they didn't knock on the door and go, hey, what do you believe? Well, actually, let me tell you why you're wrong. Instead, they would actually listen to the person, respect the person's point of view, and just share their own point of view. And that actually shifted so much. And it's really important for us to recognize the power of that and the power that we could have if only we would use this. So highly, highly recommend How Minds Change by Dave McRaney. He also has a very cool podcast called You Are Not So Smart, which I also encourage listening to. Next, we have the work of my good friend and mentor, Dr. Richard Bandler, and the wonderful John LaValle. Richard and John worked on this book called Persuasion Engineering, which was released in the late 90s, I think 1996 or so. And in a nutshell, it's the most important elements brought from the field of NLP and from Richard's work and with John's experience in business, whereby they were focusing very much on persuasion. It's not just about words, it's about how people process language, emotion, and sensory experiences. In a nutshell, obviously, as I mentioned, a lot of the field of neurolinguistic programming is in there. They talk about the power of anchoring, a different form of anchoring than we talked about earlier on. This is more about finding ways to be able to capture emotions and trigger those emotions in the conversations that we have, using what we call embedded commands and other language skills that we can use from the field of NLP, and being able to reframe problems or challenges or objections in a new way. These principles are used in lots of areas in terms of sales negotiations by leaders, in terms of public speaking, or even in your personal life for influence. But a lot of the insights from the book really revolve around the fact that people respond to their internal representations of the world, not to necessarily the world itself. Again, the map is not the territory. Again, back to Plato's cave. The way in which we think about the world is not how the world is. So recognizing that will allow us to be a lot more effective at persuading others, because then we need to be focusing our attention on how can we create the right kind of internal representations for the folks that we're trying to influence or persuade. You also learn in the book a lot more about how language can shape perception. We change the words, we change the experience because we change the meaning of what we're saying. And the way that we say something matters even more than sometimes what we say. So once again, it's not just about the words, it's also about our tone, and it's about the way in which we communicate the message as well. Part of it is about building rapport, being able to mirror and match the body language or tone of voice of the other person. We want to be able to take objections and reframe them. So be able to change the words, something from being expensive to becomes an investment that allows them to be able to succeed. Using embedded commands where we're able to, in our language, give them more direct suggestions, which is more likely to be taken by their unconscious mind in a positive way. Being able to set up what we call positive anchors so that we're able to create the kind of emotions we want them to associate with the products or services or ideas or offers that we have. So we're able to generate those emotions through our own emotional state, through the words we use, through the questions we ask, through the stories we tell, and then find a way to anchor those emotions, to find triggers in our conversations where we can capture that emotion, and then we can create that feeling whenever we talk about what we do. So it's a really powerful and effective way of being able to influence and persuade effectively. We will also use sensory-based language, so we can paint pictures, speaking in visuals, or auditory language, or what we call kinesthetic language in terms of feel language, based upon how the person processes information. And we can also trigger curiosity with what we call open loop. So leaving questions unanswered to keep the engagement high. So we start, we get them thinking, we build that anticipation, and as a result of that, we're more likely to grab and keep attention in the conversations we have. But certainly recommend Persuasion Engineering. It's a wonderful book in the area of persuasion and could certainly help you. And it's very much more conversational, very easy for us to understand. It kind of comes from almost like, feels like you're being taught these principles live there in front of you, which is really, really cool. So definitely recommend Persuasion Engineering. Number 8 is The Catalyst by Jonah Berger, How to Change Anyone's Mind. And this is really about how persuasion is less about adding pressure and more about removing friction, so change happens naturally. And he talks about in this book, and Jonah Berger is a wonderful author, writes a lot about influence actually, and he talks about the concept of reactance. And this is our natural tendency to resist a influence attempt whenever we feel pressured. So we're more likely to say no straight off the bat. And that's really something that's a natural part. What's a child's first word? It's like no, right? So it's a natural reaction we have to say no whenever someone's trying to persuade us on something. He also talks about the concept of the endowment effect, which is that we tend to overvalue things that we already have and reducing the distance between where we are and where we need to be. In other words, if a new idea is too far from existing beliefs, then it'll be rejected. So what we need to do is sort of map where a person is and where we want them to be and make it easier for us to close the distance, right? So in other words, if we throw an idea that's too far outside the person's way of thinking, then we're going to get it rejected. So how can we ensure that whatever we say to them is plausible in their model of the world? So if they agree to that, then we've gotten them on the road towards where we need them to get to. So again, we're reducing friction by reducing the distance. Also, people don't tend to move forward if they fear the unknown. So we want to reduce uncertainty at all levels if possible. And we want to be able to give them corroborating evidence. In other words, proof from multiple sources, which stacks the deck in our favor and makes them more likely to believe in it. So these are some of the important principles of being able to effectively be what we call a catalyst for change and a catalyst to change minds. This is really helpful in terms of leadership and sales and marketing and coaching and influence as well. And some of the more unique ideas of this is that so often people are talking about being persuasive. Really what Jonah Berger is talking about is lowering the barrier to action. Again, not a million miles away from the nudging piece, but instead of it being about your environment, it's about the way in which you're communicating the message. And people are less resistant, he talks about, when they feel the changes more of their idea. Again, not a million miles away from the Dan Pink stuff about autonomy, but we're looking to make small shifts where people feel a sense of ownership over it and they're more likely to take action. So in a nutshell, ask, don't tell. So questions get people thinking in new ways and get people to actually take more of a sense of ownership over things. Reduce the pressure by letting them explore without feeling forced. So make it so that people feel it's coming from them and they're the ones making up their mind. And make change easy and effortless and convenient for them. Again, similar to some of the ideas we talked about in terms of nudge. Highlight losses, not just gains. The importance of fear of missing out, the FOMO, content to motivate action as well. And also he mentions the importance of social proof. So people trust peers more than experts. So once again, let's leverage the power of what most people just like them are doing as opposed to anything else. A lot of companies, for example, Netflix lets you cancel any time and they'll tell you that whenever you're signing up. This lowers the risk. It increases sign up because again, it doesn't feel like they're trying to force you into something. And Amazon's buy now button tends to reduce decision fatigue because it makes it so easy, the one-click purchase. And dietitians can ask, what's one thing you'd be willing to change? Which once again, it's just reducing it down. All you need to do is just one thing. It's much easier for us to do as well. So The Catalyst is an excellent book. Again, Jonah Berger is the name of the author there. Then we have Words That Work. It's not what you say, it's what people hear, by Frank Luntz. And Frank Luntz, this is written in 2007, he was a political consultant where he really worked on and helped political campaigns. And he did a lot of market research. So he really was an expert in what people were saying about like key political messages and whatnot. And he talked about it's not the words that you use, it's about how those words make people feel. And he talked about some of the most important elements in terms of effective communication, in terms of how you frame an idea, present an idea matters more than the idea itself, and the importance of emotionally loaded words. And this is, of course, going to be relevant in terms of politics, but also in public speaking, in marketing, in sales, in branding, in negotiation. Some of the important, unique ideas from this book would include shorter is better. So people remember simple, punchy messages more than they do long-winded ones, of course. People react emotionally first and logically second, and words create frames. If you change the frame, you'll change the outcome. So some examples of strategies he recommends is use fewer words. He gives the examples of the ad, got milk, worked a lot better than do you drink enough milk? Frame the message in a more positive way. So affordable care sounds better than cheap insurance. You'll probably hear a lot of this in terms of the political use of words and wonder why they do this. Well, this is why. Avoid jargon. So try to speak like a human, not a corporation. Use metaphors and stories. Analogies make ideas memorable and easier to pass on. Repeat key phrases, of course, the power of repetition, and use the language of your audience. Mirror how they naturally speak. So another example from politics is that death tax replaced estate tax to shift public opinion on it. Nike's Just Do It is simple, emotional, and memorable. And made with real fruit makes processed snacks sound healthier. Right? It's like made with real fruit. Oh, great. This sugar bar, it sounds great because it's a blueberry sugar bar, right? But at the same time, it's not the best. Another example, I'm not sure if he gave it in this book, but certainly a good example of this is when they wanted to change the reputation of Vegas because it was known as the gambling place. And they started to refer to gambling as gaming. And as a result of that, they were able to make Vegas a lot more appealing for people to go, I'm not going to gamble. It's just kind of, it's a gaming place. It's not gambling. I mean, they spend money to hopefully win more money and potentially lose everything, but it's gaming. It's not gambling, it's gaming. Number 10, finally, is Contagious, another book from the work of Jonah Berger. This is in 2013. This is really about making things go viral, right? And he talks about virality isn't random. It follows specific predictable patterns. And he has what he calls the STEPS framework. So I'll just walk you through this quickly. First of all, the S is social currency. In other words, people share what makes them look good. So if you want something to go viral, create something that makes people look good because they've shared it. Look how smart I am. Look how great I am. Look how kind I am. Look how great a sense of humor I have. Social currency is one of the reasons we share stuff. So how can you make your ideas have lots of social currency? People want to share them because it makes them look good. Number 2, triggers. Everyday cues remind people of your messages. So once again, we're looking to be able to figure out, is there a way that we can make it so that we can associate whatever message or product or service or idea that we have with everyday cues. So when they think of the cue, they think of our product Again, some great stuff there. Emotion, high arousal emotions or high intense emotions, such as awe, anger, and humor, tend to drive sharing. So people are more likely to share things that make them feel something strong. Now, this is important. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're more likely to share positive content. They're more likely to share content that makes them feel strongly. So, again, you'll see lots of examples of viral content that makes us so angry. That's how the media do it. They get us angry and really annoyed and terrified because they know that will get people to share it. That will get people's attention. So, while I certainly don't recommend that, the reason it's powerful is not because it's scary or because it makes us furious. It's because it gets our heart beating faster. So these high arousal emotions, the ones that get our heart beating faster, they're the ones that tend to be shared the most. They're the ones that tend to be the most engaging. So how can we create more intense experiences in the audience that we're communicating with? The first P is public visibility. This is if it's seen, it spreads. So we want to make sure we get it out in front of as many people as possible. The second P is practical value. This is if it's useful, if it helps us, it gets shared. And finally, stories. Stories help people to remember the messages more effectively. We're more likely to remember things when they're in the form of narratives than if we just communicate the messages themselves. These principles, of course, are used all the time in terms of marketing, content creation, and branding. So once again, some of the unique insights are that surprising, funny, and emotionally impactful stories tend to travel the fastest. People will share things that make them look smart, generous, or connected. And if you want something to spread, make it easy for people to talk about it. Some of the best lessons here is make your idea feel exclusive, make it feel like not everyone knows this. A lot of reasons why people believe in some of the conspiracy theories is because it makes them feel smarter. If I get to tell you that actually nobody walked on the moon, right? Or I get to tell you, well, actually, there's the deep state government. Well, actually, we're all doing this and there's these special interests. The more I tell you that, the more it makes me feel like I'm smarter than you because I get to tell you what you don't know. You're an idiot. You're a sheep that believes in this or that, or you believe in that conspiracy, or you believe in that mainstream media, or you believe in that. You believe what everyone else does, all the sheep, but I'm the smartest candle on the cake. Totally messed up that metaphor, but you get what I'm saying, right? I'm the smartest one. So therefore, a lot of times, if you make your idea exclusive, and not everyone knows this, people will be more likely to love it. Tie your message to daily habits. So once again, Kit Kat linked itself to a wonderful ad campaign. You know, have a break, have a Kit Kat. I don't know if that's a big thing in America, but it certainly was back home in Ireland. We use high arousal emotions. Again, don't stick to fear and anger. Instead, it's like awe, surprise, make people laugh. Those are the best kind of emotions that we can use if we want to get more people to share it. Make it public. Apple's white earbuds made it very easy to signal to people that we're using it. So you know when someone has earpods on, or at least it looks like they've Apple earpods on. It's a great way to advertise. Give practical, useful tips. Life hacks tend to spread like wildfire because, again, if you learn, if I only do this, if I only have an ice bath while I'm exposing myself to sunlight, I'm going to trigger massive amounts of dopamine. I mean, obviously, better life hacks than that. But the point goes that if it's very easy for us to apply, we're more likely to spread the word. And tell stories, not statistics. Good stories tend to travel further. So lots of great examples given in that book. Definitely highly recommend Contagious. Again, along with The Catalyst, Jonah Berger's other book. Very much recommended it. These have been 10 powerful, brilliant, wonderful books in the area of influence and persuasion. They're by no means an exhaustive list. There's tons and tons of other wonderful, amazing books out there on the field of influence and persuasion that I would highly, highly, highly recommend. But this gives you a starter, gives you a primer. See, we're linking back to Persuasion there. But anyway, I hope you found this useful. Definitely recommend reading all 10 of these. Put on your list and very much hope that you find it useful. And I hope that this provided you with a number of insights about these different books that will help you to be even more persuasive and even more influential moving forward. For now, thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe, rate and review if you can. And may you go out there and become even more persuasive. May you read these books and download all the wisdom into the recesses of your mind. And may you have lots of wonderful experiences as a result. And may, of course, the forces always continue to very much be with you. I'm Owen Fitzpatrick. Talk to you soon.